morning, everyone. So the balance patch has dropped yesterday, I believe, and so nothing. We'll talk about the orcs because obviously we're orc players, right? Um, I won't really touch too much on the other armies. Nothing is. I mean, some got hit harder than others. Some got hit more than others. I did briefly look through most things. I don't know if anything's going to change the world. But let's talk about the orc one. So I know one thing for sure is that the orc one, that nets are going up to 2 points a model again. This was confirmed on the forums that they just left it out of this one on accident. So what did we get? They clarified shrooms. Actually, let's actually look what that means. I don't actually know what that means. I don't use them ever, so let's see what they actually did. What they do. Each model rolls to cast announcement. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what they actually cleared up. Anyway, doesn't matter. So the wyverns went down 10 on the orc warlords. We got some restrictions on some mounts. Gobos went down to 5 points for additional models. Mad Gits went up 5. Spotter went down 25. And we know nets go up to 2 points a model. So I'm not going to talk about the wyvern change because honestly it doesn't fucking matter that much. It's cool if you take a wyvern and you get 10 more points. I don't think it's changing the world, especially because it's only on the warlord version, which I understand, but I don't think 10 points is enough to say. I just don't think it's enough. The guy's like 600 points, and the wyvern just isn't that great of a mount to warrant that. I think I don't want to go too down the rabbit hole of this, but I mean the Griffin High Elf Prince, the Nova Griffin guy, it's just a different world. But with the hereditary and the healing from the mocked, which it's got nerfed, it just doesn't compare well in my opinion. It's like, well, it's 35 points different. It was cheaper before. He was closer to 180, I think, in the beginning. So at the one point, I think the Wyvern was more expensive. But the other guy has, what, 4 or 5 strength 6 attacks. I think it's 5. I think it's 5 strength 6 on the charge with lightning reflexes. He can get a way better save. Well, can he get a better save? I guess if you go Death Cheater. I don't know. Maybe it's more maybe the way the army works that it just doesn't seem to work as well in the orc list. But maybe it's the healing. Maybe it does. I don't know. I'm not here to debate the wyverns. I don't use them. The character mounts don't matter. People who want to spam random shit, sure, you can't do it anymore. But that just, and I don't even. I mean, people will be like, "Oh, you just killed a couple really fringe armies," and I'm like, "That's fine. You don't need 8 spider heroes running around. You don't need 8 cheap wolf chariots running around. Most people don't take more than 3 anyway. So let's just cut those weird builds out. So we're down to 4 major changes. The Madgits, the Goblins, and the Nets. I would say the Madgits don't matter per se because it basically is a net neutral if you take 30-man units because you 10 extra guys, 5 extra for Madgits. You get 5 points on the 45 man units, and you lose 5 points on the 20-man units. But really, most people took 30-man units, so it's basically net neutral there. And it helps other Goblin units. The Nets going up to 2 points a model is a big change. I know they talked about maybe it should have been points per unit because it feels... I don't know. 30 points might have been a little cheap, but I feel like 60 points is really expensive. I'm not going to pay 60 points. You're paying basically 20% of their power just to get -1 strength, -1 AP, potentially. It's a great ability. I mean, that's the problem. It's a very powerful ability. It combos very well if you have the heroes and stuff to combo it with. In my experience, it didn't combo that often. There was moments where you're like, oh, fuck yeah, you're -1 AP. I have my 1 up rerollable save hero in there. Let's go. And there was some cute times where I took a strength 5 monster and made it strength 3 with nets and the Thom spell. Smite. But for 60 points, I don't think it's worth it. I think you're starting to get to the point where this unit is already 400 points with if you take Relentless Banner and all that good stuff, and now you're talking about a 425 point unit with full command for for 30 models that don't fight very well. It just becomes way too much, in my opinion. Um, it just doesn't feel good, and I'm not here to complain too much about Relentless Banner Mad Gets. I understand why they were good, but at the same point when using them, once you throw the Fanatic, sometimes you're just like, well, this unit sucks. For 400 points, the problem is you lose the Fanatic points if the unit dies. So take the 45 man, for example, it's 500 some points. When you throw those 3 Fanatics, it's really cool, but if your unit dies afterwards, you're worth 500 points. So yeah, that's something to consider. I do still have some Mad Gets in my current list, which we'll go over, and we'll talk about why I like that. So, and the additional Goblin models, it's really nice if you're taking big units of Goblins. I mean, I've complained, and we'll say maybe I'm the reason everything changed. Look at Vassals, went up 1 point per model, 1 point per spear. And I think a big Vassal unit went up like 50 to 60 points, while a big Goblin unit with spears went down like 30 points because of the additional models. So I think they're way more in line with, before I think 40 non-poison Goblins was the same points as 40 Clan Rats with spears. Both had spears. And the problem was, Clan Rats were like move 5, better agility, better weapon skill, better offense, potentially better leadership, probably better leadership on their own. I mean, they're 5 by themselves with the rank thing, and Goblins are 6. So we have Warpath, sure, it's a different army, sure, but it didn't add up. It wasn't that close. Now we're like 20 points less. We lose the stats. I think it's fair. And now the poison guys are a little bit more, but it feels more worth it. So if you want to take big Goblin units with spears, I think the Forest Goblin unit was already pretty interesting, and now you're looking at a 20, 30 point reduction. You're not going to complain. I mean, Command did affect everybody, but it's pretty nice now that you can have really big units of Goblins, and they're like 60 points less than they used to be. I think the 2 biggest changes this are going to be the Splatterer change and the nets, because I think what was before, I think if you just put this change in, I think net units, 30-man nets with 2 Fanatics, as we talked about, were still really good. It was a net neutral change. Sure, you could take bigger Goblin units. I think because the nets are going to change, I think you're going to change a little bit how your core is set up. Now let's talk about the Splatterer change, because that's probably the biggest one in the Orc world, because you didn't see too many normal Splatterers, and we'll just go up to the Splatterer entry because why not? So now it's 55 points different than the Git launcher. I think they used to be like 20 points different. So now, it's a much different beast, because obviously Strength 5 AP 4 is a lot different than 1 Strength 7 hit, though, is it really? I mean, you only get D3 plus 1 hits. It's not that much worse. Damn, for 55 points. I like the Splatterers now. So I think the fairest comparison is 2 Splatterers versus 3 bolt throwers. Since people took 3 to 4 bolt throwers a lot just to have a threat, and now you can go 2 Splatterers instead. I will say I'm not a huge fan of the Orc Overseer. I think it is a good upgrade. I think it has uses. Plus 1 health point is pretty nice. Being large is nice. Does it make you large? Being large is probably the best part about it. And I think you can get away with it without it because, I don't know, I just think, you can see over most things. Sure, you can't see another ranked unit over one of your small units, but whatever. I mean, my army is a lot of trolls and big boys anyway, so if I don't have line of sight, being large isn't going to save me. Also, it's 20 points, so 40 points for 2. That's a Scepter of Power. That's almost a Binding Throw. I think it kind of gets into the point of, it's just one of those upgrades you feel like you can drop just to keep the shooting cheap. It's also, 140, 20? It's 15% of the cost to just be large. I don't know if I like that. That being said, let's look at the actual thing. 3 bolt throwers versus 2 catapults. So obviously 2 catapults can die faster technically because there's only 2 versus the 1. And they both have the same stats as far as discipline and stuff. So you're not getting anything more in terms of staying power, but that's all right. So now you're talking about shooting power. Well, you have a strength 6 shot versus strength 7 shot, but I think the biggest thing is always going to be the cover. You don't get cover from catapults. So if you assume, and it's also strength 7 AP4 versus AP10 strength 6. So there is a difference there. If you're shooting big monsters, if a monster was standing out in the open with no cover, 3 skewers are slightly better than 2 catapults, depending on the toughness. I mean, it's still, no matter what the toughness, whether it's toughness 7, 6, or 5. Because you got to remember that the catapults do hit wound on +1. So you're going to hit on the same thing. Reroll doesn't matter if you're shooting a monster because the second hit's garbage. So it's really about the strength. So even though, just straight math, 3 versus 2 shots, you're going to hit more with the 3 shots. The fact that you wound better with the catapults does bring the math closer. The minute something's in cover, the catapults are better. Period. The minute you're in cover, the catapults are better. They also have a slightly longer long range, which is actually quite interesting because it's 30 inches for their long. So you're in short range at 30 instead of 24. So that's something too. So something sitting at 25 inches from you, in cover, the skewer hits on 6s, the catapult hits on 4s, for example. It has clipped wings, so it's better versus dragons. It's not as good versus cowboys, but the problem with cowboys is when skewers is there's always a chance. That was the phrase is there's always a chance. But a cowboy sitting at long range behind a unit with 6s, at best, maybe even 7s if it was hardcover if they did it right. So it wasn't easy to hit cowboys. That's the problem. It was it made people think. Not gonna dispute that. It definitely made people think about where they were gonna put their models. But I think 2 catapults also have the advantage of they're better against multiple units, right? No, sure, skewers, if you're shooting like the flank of knights or something, they do have some uses. They can because they're AP10 through all the shots. I think in the case of catapults, though, if people have if you're facing elves or you're facing, anything like Skaven, anything with a toughness res 3, res 4 ranked infantry, it's just kind of nice to kill a couple. If you get the hit off on a Sea Guard unit, 16 hits probably if they're in 4 ranks, you're probably killing 4 to 6 depending on how many ranks they're in. That's not bad. You're not going to do that with the bolt thrower, right? So it's people can't hide everything. So you probably have better target selection because there's times where people just put everything in cover from your bolt throwers, and you're just I guess I'm shooting one guy or something on a 7 because it's long range. I just think for 140 because it's 280 versus 270. I just think the math works out that the catapults are almost always better, unless somebody's stupid and just lining up in the middle of the board for you all the time. It's almost exclusively better to have 2 catapults than 3 skewers. I think versus a 1-up save hero, it's worse. I will say that, but whatever, deal with it. Of all the things to be worse against, I just think having 2 is a nice threat now. I was always talking about skewers just felt bad because they missed all the time. Now catapults can misfire, skewers can't. That is a big deal. There is a 1 in 18 chance every time you shoot a catapult that it can't shoot anymore. The nice part about catapults are they're fucking cheap now. 280 for 2. Empire Cannon's like 260. So it's just, it's funny because in 2 months ago, don't hate me, Thomas. A Scorpion was 115 and a catapult was 165, so there were 50 points difference. Now the catapult's only 10 points more than it was. Oh yeah, clip wings is better for dragons. I might have said that already. That being said, it's for the threat, right? And so catapults have a little bit more uses out there for shooting purposes, and it's just to make people think. And if they want to sit back and be dicks, you can kind of sit back with them and at least have some shots. And if they misfire and can't shoot, you're not wasting a ton. It's 140 points. It could be a chaff unit, but sometimes if you have too much chaff, you just kind of sit there anyway, and they don't do anything. So I like the threat of it. Maybe it's a little annoying that it creates a model for ambushers to kill, but whatever. If you put it in the corner and they have to waste the ambusher killing it, then you deal with it. So I definitely want to try that. So from that perspective, I made a list. Oh, I need a general. This guy will be my general. So this is a list. I was talking to the guy who came in second for orcs in New Year's Revolution. So I was first orcs, he was second orcs. And I liked his list. He didn't have chat. His name was Kaiser, so he's Spanish. I've been talking to him about orcs. And so when the update came out, it did change my perspective with the net thing, because I think I was talking about a list in the last event, which is last time, with the double master and stuff. And I haven't given up totally on double master. Obviously, if you look at the list I'm playing in this particular, the minute I'm showing you, you could turn this guy into a master, and then just have 200 points to spend on something else, if you really wanted. But this is kind of, when talking to him, I kind of made a different list in between. So, do I think this list is good? I have no idea. We're going to talk about it, though. And I have some things that I wouldn't take before, so. The only thing that kind of came from the update would be, because if you looked at my New Year's resolution, it was illegal because it's 60 points over now. So I don't even know what I would do with that list, because it's 60 points over in core. You could just drop them all. Well, if you drop it all, then you gain 60 points in core, and I guess I was already 20 points over in core. So if you gain 60 points, I'd have to put 40 more points in the core. Anyway. You basically have to put it all in the core, so I don't know. I'll just talk through some of the reasonings, and I stole some of this from him, straight up, when we were talking this morning. So let's start from the hero section. So one part of the idea in these kind of lists is trimming the fat to an extent that, I don't want to say no wasted models, no wasted units. This sounds really weird to say, but, he was telling me, he's like, I forgot what his phrase was, but essentially you gotta take risks. To get stuff, stuff has to die for things to happen, right? You can't play the game where everything's perfect, everything's sitting back, and everything is oh my god, I can't fight with anything because X, Y, Z. You kind of have to, shit has to die sometimes. And that's one thing that I think people don't realize a lot is, sometimes your shit just needs to go out there and kill something. There's nothing else to say about it. You gotta go kill some, and you might have to sacrifice a unit for it. But if the trade is worth it, then it's worth it. And so one thing I like units that can do multiple things. We talked about my last list where I had the boar rider. I had the boar boys who had to basically guard the general, and then I had the general who kind of had to stay in the middle, but he was on a boar, so it was kind of does he really need to? And so that unit felt really bad in the middle because it actually wasn't strong to take a charge. So the positioning of the Lord was good because he's chilling in the middle, but it was bad because the unit wasn't that strong on its own. It couldn't fight a lot of things. It couldn't stand its ground very well. And so you kind of wasted the movement of it because I didn't want to risk it, but at the same time, blah, blah, blah. We've talked about why it's good, bad, whatever. So if I still like having the Fighting Lord, which I do, maybe the question is, maybe the Fighting Lord goes on foot. So if you look at this character setup, the one thing you're seeing is I don't have the 18-inch BSB anymore. Well, or I have an 18-inch BSB, it's on the item. So the theory here is that I lost the Goblin Hero, and I lost Relentless Banner, both of which are very good on Fanatics and Scary. But if you don't have them, you start to diminish the value of the 18-inch BSB. So now you're paying 215 points to have an 18-inch BSB, which I still think is very good. But the hero points just don't add up. So it's really 145 points for the 18-inch BSB because you're paying 80 for the Great Green Arrow. So you're saying here's 145 points, but it's also more. It's 145 points, and here's some hero points. Right, I'd be 100 points over in heroes if I had him. So I can't fit him unless I drop something. And I said I wanted the Goblin King with the Gargantuan, and he really does need an 18-inch BSB to kind of play wide. And if you look at my last list, I actually had two bunkers, you could say. I had a bunker in the Forest Goblins, and I had a bunker in the Boar Boys. And that was, 500 points in bunkers almost. Now I don't have any bunkers. They're all fighting units. Yeah, where would I, So So I have the Forest Goblin King, who I said I really like, and I want to try. I kind of want the 18-inch BSB with them. Great. All right, I want a Leadership 9 General. So my options were Double Master with Crown of Autocracy, and then you're talking about a Lord that is hard, not that hard to kill, but you don't want to die. And so maybe you say, let's go with a Foot Warlord. But I like mine that fights well. So you have this guy who has parry, which is really good because he's only offensive 5, so a lot of heroes hit him with 6. He has 2 up, 5 up, pretty good for a foot hero, and he has 4 strength, 6 attacks base with plus D3, which I played against the other day, and obviously I've played with Omen, and it just fucked me up. It just kept killing so many models, which was very obnoxious. I did lose Potion of Speed because I was over points. It's something I'm thinking about. You can put it back in. You can drop Potion of Strength. You can drop Binding Scroll, add Inceptor Power, blah, blah, blah. I got to see how it feels. There's a lot of things in the game that are just straight up faster than him. I don't know how much it matters to not have Potion of Strength because he's not fast to be. He's only 4. I mean, going to 7 is a big deal. We'll see. And he's not that expensive. He's $455, and he can chop monsters' head off. I mean, that's the big thing in this unit, right? He's going to go in a common orc unit that doesn't fight very well, but it's cheap. It's 35 models for $370, but you're putting in a Lord. And yes, the unit's going to be frenzy. I get it, guys. But, you're not frenzying 8 boar boys and a Lord. You're frenzying a 6 static res unit with a guy that just fucks people up. And I've played with an Omen guy on a boar, and I know that this guy can fuck some people up. He can be stomped for sucks, but, well, you're in a unit, so you stomp the unit and he kills you. He kills monsters. He kills things. I like the guy. We'll see how it works. I know... Allore's been doing it too. So I have been taking ideas from other people. I have my Witch Doctor Lord, or Thumb Master still with the Binding Scroll. I just like a Binding Scroll. He's 410. He's cheap. It's a magic phase. This is the edition that you kind of get for dropping the BSB to the idol. You get a Shaman. So what do you get? This is taken from Kaiser as well. He uses this. And Allure actually uses... I think Allure uses an Adept and a Master. So I had the guy on a wolf, which was a chaff and 1 spell. So this guy is more expensive, obviously. He's $270. I don't actually have a good place to put the mage on a thing. So even if I had so I have 300 points if I drop that. Yeah, I don't even have the points to do both. He could be an apprentice on a wolf, but I don't think it's worth it. Because he actually does provide some interesting things. One being, he is a feral orc. You're going to go in this unit anyway, so if you're going to have a Frenzy Lord, might as well have a Frenzy Shaman. But 15 points for a 5 board. What's really nice about him is, if you get a Shamanism spell off, he is another threat to take challenges from good heroes. And especially since you have 4 static res, you have 4 ranks and a banner, you have 5 static res, you have a hero that, basically your choice is, somebody charges you with a hero. You can either say, my Lord can take it, I'm going to kill him with my Lord. You can say, my champ's going to take it. I'm going to try to kill your unit and win by combat res. You can say, if you got a Shamanism spell off, you can say, my Orc Shaman's going to take it. He's 270. If he dies, it's not a big deal. But he's also 5 up board, 5 up to wound him. He does have Potion of Strength, which is, I have 3 crush attacks in this army, which is pretty funny. And just, so what? If he dies, he dies. But there's a good chance, most heroes aren't going to be able to kill him in 1 round because of the 5 up, or 5 up to wound him. And so now you're getting into this realm of maybe you just win on res because you don't kill him. Or he takes the challenge from the hero, maybe survives it, and then your Omen guy kills the unit. It's just like that. He's an apprentice. He has good spells. Shamanism is great for orcs. If you need Swarm of Insects, you have a nice guy that can 2 dice Swarm of Insects, so you have a little bit better range spells, I'd say. Maybe you don't have to take Hand of Heaven all the time. Maybe he's good for taking the H spell. You don't take it on your Goblin Witch Doctor because you don't have Heirloom anymore. And so if you're playing the long range game, you can drop Comets and you can do Swarm of Insects versus shooting armies. The number 1 spell is amazing. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. +1 strength, +1 toughness in an orc army is pretty solid, especially when you have. It doesn't really matter for idols, but it's really good on the orc unit. They can be toughness 5. It's great on the trolls. They can be strength 6, toughness 5. The Goblin King, everybody. Sorry, everybody gets it. I mean, this becomes what, H strength on the charge. It becomes H strength 6, H strength 5, and 5 strength 5 shield breaker. So solid spells. And I get it. You don't have. It's not the master. He's 100 some points. It's hard to fit everything in this. So it's an interesting hero setup. Coming on to core, it's exactly 1125, the perfect number. We're talking. We get our 3 scoring, similar to before, except instead of 2 relentless banner units and a bunker, it's a actual fighting unit and then 2 slower goblin units. Witch Doctor can go in a cave goblin if you're going to sit one back to kind of be defensive with the fanatics, or it can go in the orcs if you really need to. 35 orcs, they have parry. They're pretty. I mean, 370 for 35 toughness 4 bodies is not that bad, especially if you're kind of bringing the heroes with you. I think the big thing is if they were like if you kind of like jacked them up to what I used to run at some point, which was something like, I think at speed, you're talking 640 points, right? You're almost doubled the points, and sure, it's better at fighting. Oh, you wouldn't have had that. You would have had like this. It's like 100 some points, 200 points more. And so I guess the idea here is just res. Excuse me, my throat is a little. I guess I could have muted myself, but yeah, I'm tempted to see how this works, because it really is kind of annoying to have a ranked unit in the middle that just can't be broken easily. Oh yeah, Frenzy's also good for fear checks, because he's leadership 9 all the time for fear. And it's a little safer with the Frenzy, because your unit isn't that fast, so you're not likely to get baited as easily. But also, we talked about, when you talk about leadership, it is nice if your general is like on the front line. Like, you got to remember, when you're playing with a bunker, you're most likely behind something. So if you're behind trolls, you're 5 inches back. So your 12 inches only go so far. When you're on the front line and you're in a unit that doesn't need to be scared of every single thing in the game, you have actually almost more leadership range in a sense. And your army only needs it for like these units anyway, like, and the trolls. So cave goblins, I still think fanatics are good. I still think they're very hard to run into. So this army still is very difficult to come at, right? It has a Thumb Mage. It has shamanism if needed. It doesn't have the double spells like we talked about in the last video, but it has some tools. It has 2 splatters. So from a long range perspective, comet splatters, swarm of insects isn't the worst. It probably does, when we get to the thing, it'll have a little bit more issues with maybe very shooty armies, like, because it has a little bit. I had 2 idols and a spider before. One being the BSB is probably a little bit more scary. Nonetheless, trolls, and for scenarios, this again, the cheap cave goblins, and maybe if I ever wanted, banners wouldn't be bad on these guys, but they're super cheap. They throw fanatics. They can get in the way. They're only worth 305. Unlike, they can flee and hopefully rally. It's just a different type of unit. When it was 400 points before, obviously, it was much more active. Let's not lie. If nets were cheaper, for 90 points per model per unit, or maybe not even 90, for 80 points per unit to get standard relentless and nets, it probably would be worth it. But we don't live in that world anymore, and nets are 60 points. So maybe 60 points for relentless, or it's 50 points per unit. It's 100 points total. Maybe it's pretty good, but you're skimming on points in this list, so you don't really have an easy way to do it unless you drop a bunch of orcs, which aren't that expensive, so it's not worth it, or you drop a chaff unit, which I don't have a chaff unit, so I want to keep it. So this is how it is. Still threatening to come at, and then there is something to be said about there's a lot of threat where people just sit there and you're just like, all right, well, if you come near me, I'm going to throw fanatics at you. So if people try to chaff you, you throw fanatics. There's less cool things to do, still solid and still threatening. People are still going to be scared of you. People might walk up. And that's the thing, is if you put 30 goblins there and somebody charges you, because of the way Relentless worked and how I used it, I tended to be actively throwing fanatics, where I would run up and throw fanatics. I didn't stand and shoot with them much. I think in this list, you might stand and shoot with them a little more, just because you don't have the range to do it, but there's some cool things you can do. And you're saving up, 50 points per unit. So let's not, we'll see. That's probably the best way to put it. We'll see. but it also gives you a nice scoring unit in the middle. You're not as good in secure, but I mean the list I was going to take was pretty garbage in secure. The nice part about secure is you have like this king who can protect a marker depending on where it is, and idols and stuff like that. Let's go to. We talked about bridge trolls. I talked about for 505 this unit. I mean, it gets out there and it fucks people up, right? Potentially. I have nothing else to say other than yeah, let's do it. Spotters, we just talked about why I like them. 280 points for some threat, some range, kill some ranked units. I mean, it still does anything with monstrous. It does D3 wounds to it, +1 on flying. It's just, dragons are always an issue. It's better versus dragons. Like, mathematically, they're better than against dragons and skewers because no cover's huge. Because the dragons very easily can cover with, like, impassable and stuff. But also, it's strength 7, so it wounds better. And it's D3 +1 wounds. I actually think it's better versus a dragon if it's in the open. Let's do the math real quick. So we're talking 3 shots at 6 wounds. Let's just say in the open at long range is 5s. So 3 shots, 1 hits, 50%. It's an average 1 wound to a dragon at long range, while 2 of these at long range, the math is a little different. It's 1/3 to hit times 3 wounds because the clipped wings is 1 wound on average, times 2 is 2 wounds, times... I know the math sounds weird, but it's 1 1/3 wound. Yep, so at long range, in the open, 2 splatters are still better than 3 catapults. In the open. So it's better in cover, obviously. So those have been issues I've had where I'm like, oh my god, this fucking dragon is... just the threat of it. I mean, I've wanted to add skewers potentially for that as well, but I think this, for the points, is going to be real nice. So then we come to the Great Green Idols. I've talked about I love 2 of them. And the biggest mental change in this list is something I didn't like before, but I do like, I'm trying now, is you just kind of accept it, is one idol has to be the BSB. It's just, you can't make this list without it because of, you'd have to change the hero setup. I don't even know what you do. Because the guy's 215 points, this guy's 270. You only have 300 points left. You have 85 points left in heroes if you take the BSB. So you're stuck. There's nothing you can add for 85 points in heroes. You can add an item. But then you're saying, if I move the BSB here, I'm going to give up on this shamanism guy. And maybe you have to put in heirloom at that point. So sure, it still works. You don't really have a good bunker for him because you don't want to put both of them in this unit. It just starts to like... You don't want to put all your guys in this unit because he might die in that unit. What it does do is it says, all right, one of my idols has to be a little bit more safe. Maybe it hides behind hiding behind terrain. It sounds really bad. Maybe it has to be a little more reserved. Keep it in the middle of the army. You have one to go on the flank still. But what is the positives? The positive is it's an 18-inch BSB off a huge base. And we've talked about this before, and I don't have UB up, so I'm not going to go to UB. But we've talked about this before where, the guy, if you're sitting in a bunker behind trolls, you are 18 inches, you're basically 5 inches back, but you have pretty good lateral coverage because 18 inches to the side. When you're an 18-inch BSB idol, one, you can be on the front line more, you can be a little more, you're more mobile left to right if you really need it, but also you're pretty much sitting on the front line. So your coverage is huge. And I played with an idle BSB before. This is not the first time I did it. I did it in another list. My first gauntlet list, I had idle BSB and 2 giants. So this is similar to that. You got to be more careful with it. True. It's still... I think the one thing that kind of sucks for other people about it is he's actually way more likely to win combat versus like single models. Because sometimes a single model just whiffs because he's resilient 8. And then you're like, I'm a BSB and I did a wound to you and you lose by 2. Like, 1, you're a self BSB, so it's good for like when you're minimized in combat. But 2, you just lose by less. It's actually harder to beat him because he gets 1 more combat res. He's supernal, so he loses by 1 less. It's actually quite obnoxious if you can keep him alive. Sure, if you face a lot of cannons, he's going to be a target, 100%. But also, to be honest with you, the spider is a damn target too. So if they're putting a lot of shots into the idle BSB and they don't kill it and they only do like 4 wounds and you can hide him, and the spider gets there uncontested, you're probably pretty happy at that point because the spider is going to go mess up some worlds. So I think in pairings you have to be a little bit safer, and I haven't gone through. One thing I want to do is kind of create almost like a pairing matrix and say like, I guess one thing that you say, I make a list, it looks pretty cool on paper, and then you say, let's say you had 4 lists. You could take 4 lists and say, how does it look in a pairing matrix? Because maybe this list is really good versus X, Y, and Z, but you could make yourself slightly worse versus X, Y, and Z, but better versus, I don't know, 2 other armies. You know what I'm saying? Or there's a world where you're saying, okay, this is really bad versus 2 Terrorgeists. Well, it's better than it used to be, at least. Because now you have Swarm of Insects and 2 catapults to at least... Actually, it's better against... Actually, 1 Terrorgeist was really annoying for my old list because I didn't... Like, all I had was 2 Thom spells to go after it, but now I have 2 catapults, Swarm of Insects, and 2 Thom spells. Maybe I'm even better versus it now. The point being is, I don't know what's good against this and what maybe... The question would be, what's good against this and does it solve problems? I don't know if that made sense. But I don't know. On paper, this list looks really cool. Obviously, I stopped the 2 level 4s before I even played it, but that's if the nets were still there, I probably would have moved it around. But this looks really cool on paper. Fights, 680 points on magic, not bad. This guy fights and does some stuff. This guy's you're going to take some magic anyway. Core, you got your chaff, you got 2 scoring that they do other things. Like if they're just sitting there in general's range, they're still annoying, they still have ranks, they're still steadfast. Yes, they're not what they were. The banner kind of doesn't matter because they were very rarely winning combat. They're really just relying on steadfast and parry. And now you have 2 gits and they're not worth as much. Great. You have 8 trolls, fucks people. You got some shooting, some long range, so I'm not spending that much on range. And then you got 2 idols, and 1's your BSB. So you have the range coverage you need. There's really a lot of things fight. You're not spending too much, what I would say, on like wasted. There's no bunkers. Maybe your mage goes here, maybe your mage goes here. Your characters are going in this unit. It's not a bunker, it fights. You have a strong lord, you can handle most things. Rank and file, your parry toughness 4 with Legion banner. You're just as good against a lot of rank and file, to be fair. And you have good buffs for it. Maybe huge fucking, Dark Elf units are going to hurt you bad, but you can get away with some of it. So that's fine. And I guess one thing that's an advantage is when you're facing other armies that have a lot of ranks, like it can be a little hard to get them without grinding them because your goblins aren't going to be good enough. So having a unit with, 6, 7 ranks to break steadfast is pretty nice. That fights as well. Because if somebody comes into you with a monster we talked about, right? I mean, the Omen guy almost one-shots half the monsters in the... Not one-shots. Does like 4 or 5... He'll one-shot him in 2 rounds. And so you don't have spears. But spears are, 2 points a model? 70 points for spears. You get a couple attacks. I mean, like I said, it's not... It's interesting. Spears in this unit cost 70, but then you lose parry. But parry's pretty nice. It's just holding on to res. I don't know. I do think it's fine not to have... You have enough AP in the list with trolls and this guy that I don't know if having spears versus the cav. I mean, you're only agility 4 when you have spears, so it's not even that high. You're not even going first a lot of the time. But it can beat monsters, which is really good. I don't know. This feels kind of nice. It's a little slow. It's only move 8, but you have the range damage that you don't need to rush them turn 1. I don't know. Anyway, I've spent 40 minutes talking about this. There you go, guys. Thanks for listening.